So now it's time for some love for Bryce Love.
On first down, the handoff to Bryce Love. Love up the middle. Bryce Love breaks the tackle. There goes Love. Touchdown, Bryce Love, 52 yards.
What's going on? Why is he suddenly let go? Well, sometimes when you have like an ACL injury, then sometimes you just don't recover. Yeah, like that. It's a little exaggerated. So, we've talked about this before. You've seen all the data. ACL injury, you get rotatory anterior instability, you rupture your ACL, then you heal after surgery. Well, what happened? Well, not every ACL reconstruction goes the way you plan it. Now, do we know the details of what kind of reconstruction, what kind of rehab he had? Do we know the details about his health history, biology? Do we know whether he was a nicotine smoker, chewing tobacco? Do we know any details? Did he take steroids? Or did he have hypothyroidism? Did he have any kind of disorder? For example, there's been there's a controversy about athletes having a seizure disorder and being on medication. So there are some medications that affect bone tissue healing. So we don't know that. All of his health information is protected, and we don't know any of that information, but what I'm saying is that healing is biological. It's not just carpentry. So in the ACL, we can drill the holes. We can replace the ligament with all sorts of things. Right now, my favorite reconstruction is bone, tendon, Achilles allograft, unless you're younger, in which case it's going to be the hamstring autograft. Basically, anyone under 30 who's a very active athlete will get an autograft. And the gold standard, of course, is still the bone, tendon, patellar tendon, bone, tendon autograft. Not a big fan. There's patellar fractures, anterior knee pain, especially in women. And you probably notice that there's a lot of important information and nuggets I'm giving you, especially when it comes to gender. Now, it's important because men and women are not biologically the same in terms of many factors, the mechanism of injury, the healing, and many other factors. So I always try and be sensitive about the different genders because more and more data is coming out about how women are different than men in terms of healing. And we as surgeons and clinicians need to accommodate for their differences. That was a segue, but it's important. Just so you understand, I'm not going to do a bone, tendon, bone autograft in a young female athlete. Why? Because I know their risk of patellar fracture, anterior knee pain is much higher because of the biomechanics of their limb alignment. And that's data published, peer-reviewed, and out there. And so we respond to it because we're all evidence-based, right? Right. Still no camera. So, getting back to Bryce Love. So, basically, when you have the ACL, let's just assume he's on an accelerated recovery, 6 months, everything should go, he should be back into play. But what happens? Well, you can always have slippage of the graft. That's always possible. Could you have denaturing of the allograft tissue? Did he have allograft or autograft? Well, does it matter? Well, it may matter, but in the end, allograft and autograft on average have anywhere between 2 and 6%, maybe as high as 8% for some allografts if you radiate them, but on average between 2 and 4% for good quality autograft versus allograft. Unless you're less than 30, you want an autograft. So if the revision rate or the repeat tear rate is low, then could he have been in one of those that had a partial tear? Or he had slippage, like the bone is in a bone socket and there's a screw in there. Well, could it slip? Sure. Could it fragment? Sure. Could the tissue dissolve? Well, it won't dissolve, but it could undergo denaturing over time. He could have a reaction to the allograft. That's always possible. He is human. Human implies a certain reaction to tissues that are not his human genotype. What does that mean? That means an allograft reaction. It's kind of like an allergic reaction to tissue that's not yours. If allograft is from someone else, then he's going to have a reaction. But what if he had, come on, he had autograft surgery. Okay, so he had autograft surgery. He can still have a reaction because it's not where it's supposed to be. And he could have an inflammatory reaction just from the surgery itself. He could have an inflammatory reaction from the screws that are used. Were they metal? Were they bioabsorbable? Were they PEEK? Were they PECA? Were they PLA? Were they PLGA? What kind of plastic was used? And then we know that certain types of plastics create a certain type of reaction, and they can cause synovitis, they can cause fluid, they can create infections, all sorts of things. Again, hey, did I tell you guys this? Implant manufacturer, design better implants. Come on, you guys are making too much money. Put some back into R&D and stop taking the profits. I think the patients deserve better. Don't be afraid of the FDA. You guys can do better. Now, back to Bryce Love. Sorry, I got a little carried away.
How do you really feel?
How do I really feel? So getting back to Bryce Love. So going back to, so aside from the implant, bone, human interaction, healing, all of those things, then we get into the idea of long-term recovery and rehab. So let's assume he healed fine, he didn't have synovitis, didn't have a reaction, didn't have failure, didn't have slippage. Well, could it have been the positioning of the graft? Could the tunnels have been placed ideally? More than likely, I suspect, with him having come from Stanford, now Washington football, he had a good surgeon, high-quality surgeon, current evidence-based techniques, and there were no issues with graft placement. So he didn't have notch impingement, he didn't have anterior placement of the graft in the tibia or the femur or vertical placement, and everything's fine. So where does that leave him? Recovery, proprioception, balance, strength, range of motion. All of those things, it's all biological. So if he recovered well, did he recover well? Did he have a nerve block at the time of surgery? Well, maybe he still had a little bit of neuropathy. Maybe he delayed his rehab. Maybe he didn't recover fully. Maybe it was all mental. We've talked about this before. Sometimes it all is mental. Even the top hockey players, football players, they often say 2 years before their ACL or their knee that had the ACL feels solid and feels like it's back to normal. It'll never be back to normal because we know from data from Stanford and many other knee labs out there by Tom Andriacchi that the actual knee gait analysis pre-ACL, during ACL injury, post-ACL reconstruction never quite returns back to normal. Now with newer techniques, maybe that's going to change, but as far as we know, it never comes back. On top of which, remember, we talked about you get your ACL, you get a big, huge bone bruise on the bones, snap. So what happens about the cartilage, the contusion? Can you have progression of that? There is so much biology. Do you like that? Was that dramatic enough? Yes. Can you add flares to that? Maybe lightning?
Do it one more time.
Like this? Yeah. Ah! There we go. So you see that lightning? Good. That was not me. So in any case, so what was I saying? So it all comes down to biology. So not every athlete's the same. Everyone can have a different healing recovery. Could be mental game, could be physiologic, could be kinematic. Maybe he didn't have the right aptitude. Maybe he didn't have the right coach. Maybe he didn't have the right rehab. For him, everything is individual. We've seen it plenty of times. An athlete who's a superstar, gets drafted, doesn't do well with one team, goes to another team. Maybe he just needs to go somewhere else. It could be a bad vibe. Maybe there's negative animosity and energy where he's playing. That's always possible. You know, maybe someone else is going to give him a shot and he'll be a star. I hope so. But oftentimes, not everyone is perfect. It comes down to biology, comes down to healing, comes down to mental game, comes down to the environment. It's multifactorial. Remember that, multifactorial, including environment. Don't smoke.